I remember the exact moment I knew it was over. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot staring at my phone. The spreadsheet was open. The numbers didn't add up. They hadn't added up for months, but I'd been telling myself stories. Good stories. Smart-sounding stories about patience and long-term thinking and riding out the storm. But the storm wasn't passing. It was getting worse. 3 months of declining revenue. 2 major clients gone without warning. 1 savings account down to $4,000. And a voice in my head that kept whispering something I didn't want to hear. This might be the end. I had built this business from nothing. Late nights, early mornings, missed vacations, sacrificed weekends. 4 years of my life poured into something I believed in, and now I was watching it slip away while I sat paralyzed in a parking lot, afraid to go home and face the truth. The worst part wasn't the fear of failure. It was the confusion. I had done everything right, at least everything that felt right. I had played it safe. I had been conservative. I had avoided risks that seemed unnecessary. I had made the responsible decisions that any sensible person would make when things got uncertain. And those decisions were killing my business. Here's what I didn't understand then, what took me years and thousands of hours of study to finally grasp. I had been playing the wrong game entirely. I thought I was being smart. I was actually being scared. And fear dressed up as wisdom is the most expensive costume an entrepreneur can wear. This is the story of how a card game taught me to save my business. But more than that, it's a framework for making decisions when everything feels uncertain and the stakes feel impossibly high. If you've ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or paralyzed by choices that all seem dangerous, this is for you. The first thing poker teaches you is that there are 2 fundamentally different games you can play. They look similar from the outside. They use the same cards, the same chips, the same rules. But they produce radically different outcomes. The first game is playing not to lose. The second game is playing to win. Most people think these are the same thing. They're not. They're opposites disguised as synonyms. When you play not to lose, your primary objective becomes survival. You tighten up. You protect what you have. You avoid situations where you might lose what you've already accumulated. Every decision filters through a single question. What's the safest way to keep what I have? When you play to win, your primary objective becomes building. You look for opportunities to increase your position. You accept calculated risks in exchange for potential growth. Every decision filters through a different question. What move gives me the best chance of winning? The difference sounds subtle. It's not. It's the difference between slowly dying and actually living. When I was struggling with my business, I was playing not to lose. I didn't call it that. I called it being prudent. Being careful, being smart, but the behavior was unmistakable. I wasn't raising my prices because I was afraid of losing clients. I wasn't pursuing bigger contracts because I was afraid of rejection. I wasn't investing in marketing because I was afraid of spending money I might need later. I wasn't hiring help because I was afraid of the commitment. Every decision I made was designed to protect what little I had left. And the result was that I was slowly bleeding out while congratulating myself on how responsible I was being. Here's what poker taught me about this pattern. Playing not to lose doesn't prevent you from losing. It just makes you lose slowly instead of quickly. It trades a dramatic death for a quiet erosion. You don't get eliminated in a single hand. You get blinded away over hundreds of hands, watching your stack shrink while you tell yourself you're being disciplined. Safe decisions don't keep you safe. They keep you small. The cruelest part is that it feels like the right thing to do. When times are hard, caution feels appropriate. Conservation feels wise. Risk feels reckless. Your instincts tell you to hunker down and wait for things to get better. But waiting is not a neutral act. Every moment you spend in survival mode is a moment you're not building. And in a competitive environment, whether that's a poker table or a marketplace, standing still means falling behind. Before we go further, I want to make sure you have the foundation for everything I'm about to share. The concepts in this video build on a mental framework that most people never learn until they've already made expensive mistakes. I put together a free PDF called The Strategy Most Players Learn Too Late that covers this framework in detail. The link is in the pinned comment. Download it now because what comes next will make much more sense with that foundation in place. Now let me explain the concept that changed everything for me. In poker, there's an idea called expected value. It sounds technical, but it's actually one of the most powerful concepts for decision-making that exists. Expected value is simply a way of measuring whether a decision is likely to make you money or lose you money over time, accounting for all possible outcomes and their probabilities. Imagine someone offers you a bet. They'll flip a coin. If it lands heads, you win $100. If it lands tails, you lose $50. Should you take this bet? The answer is obviously yes. Half the time you win 100, half the time you lose 50. On average, each flip is worth $25 to you. The expected value is positive. You should take this bet every single time it's offered, even though you'll lose half of those individual bets. This is where most people get it wrong. We focus on the individual outcome. We imagine losing $50 and that feels bad. But professional decision makers focus on the aggregate outcome. They understand that over enough repetitions, positive expected value bets make you money. The individual losses are just noise. Now here's where it gets interesting for business. Most entrepreneurs don't think in terms of expected value. They think in terms of emotional value. They don't ask whether a decision is likely to produce positive returns over time. They ask whether a decision feels safe right now. And those two questions produce completely different answers. Let me give you a specific example. When I was afraid to raise my prices, the expected value was clearly positive. I was charging $2,000 for a service that took me 40 hours. I knew that if I raised to $3,000, maybe 15% of prospects would say no, who would have said yes before. But 85% would still say yes. I'd make 50% more revenue while losing 15% of volume. The math was obvious. But emotionally, the idea of any client saying no felt devastating. I couldn't afford to lose anyone. Every client felt irreplaceable. So I kept my prices low, kept my margins thin, and kept myself trapped in a cycle of overwork and underpay. I was making negative expected value decisions because they felt emotionally safer. And that emotional safety was slowly bankrupting me. This is the trap. We optimize for emotional comfort instead of mathematical reality. We choose the option that feels least scary instead of the option that's most likely to work. And we call this wisdom because it sounds better than calling it what it really is. Fear with a business plan is still fear. Let me tell you about the turning point. This is the part most people skip over, but it's the part that matters most. I was reading about poker strategy, specifically about how professional players approach situations where they're short-stacked in a tournament. A short stack means you have fewer chips than most of your opponents. You're in a vulnerable position. Your margin for error is small. The instinct when you're short-stacked is to tighten up, to wait for a perfect hand, to avoid confrontations, to survive until someone else makes a mistake and gets eliminated. But professional players know something counterintuitive. The shorter your stack gets, the more aggressively you need to play. Not recklessly, not foolishly, but more aggressively. The reason is mathematical. When you wait, you're paying blinds and antes that gradually erode your stack. Each orbit around the table costs you chips. If you wait too long, you'll eventually have so few chips that even winning a hand won't matter. You'll have survived yourself into irrelevance. The paradox is that the cautious approach increases your risk of elimination. By trying to avoid danger, you drift into a position where danger becomes inevitable. When I read this, something clicked. I realized my business was short-stacked. I had limited resources, limited time, limited runway, and my instinct had been to play tight, wait for perfect opportunities, and conserve what I had. But the blinds were coming. Rent, $1,800 a month. Software subscriptions, $600. Insurance, $400. The costs of staying in the game were eating my stack whether I played or not. Every month I spent in conservation mode was a month my reserves got smaller. And the smaller they got, the fewer options I had. I was waiting for conditions to improve, while my ability to capitalize on improvement was slowly disappearing. I needed to make moves. Not reckless moves. Not desperate all-in bets on long shots. But calculated, aggressive moves that gave me the best chance of building something while I still had enough resources to matter. So I raised my prices from $2,000 to $3,200. I sent cold emails to companies I thought were out of my league. I spent $800 on a marketing test I'd been postponing for 6 months. I hired a contractor at $30 an hour to handle tasks that were consuming time I needed for growth. Each of these felt terrifying. Each felt like a risk I couldn't afford, but the risk I hadn't been counting was the risk of continued inaction, the risk of bleeding out slowly while telling myself I was being responsible. Caution has a cost. You just don't see the invoice. I want to introduce another concept that will change how you see your decisions. This is where smart people accidentally destroy their own edge. In poker, we talk about the difference between being results-oriented and being process-oriented. A results-oriented thinker judges decisions by their outcomes. If a decision led to a good outcome, it was a good decision. If it led to a bad outcome, it was a bad decision. Simple. A process-oriented thinker judges decisions by their reasoning. If a decision was based on sound logic, good information, and positive expected value, it was a good decision regardless of the outcome. If a decision was based on poor logic, bad information, or negative expected value, it was a bad decision regardless of the outcome. This distinction sounds academic. It's not. It's the difference between learning from your experience and being misled by it. When I was struggling, I had developed a results-oriented mindset without realizing it. I looked back at past decisions that hadn't worked out and concluded that taking risks was dangerous. I looked at safe decisions that had avoided disaster and concluded that caution was wisdom. But I wasn't accounting for variance. I wasn't accounting for the fact that good decisions sometimes produce bad outcomes, and bad decisions sometimes produce good outcomes. I was pattern matching on results instead of evaluating processes. Here's a specific example. 2 years earlier, I had tried a Facebook ad campaign, spent $400, got 0 clients. Concluded, paid advertising doesn't work for my business. But that conclusion was wrong. The ad was poorly written. The targeting was too broad. The landing page was weak. The decision to try advertising was right. The execution was flawed. But because I judged by results instead of process, I avoided all paid marketing for 2 years. That avoidance probably cost me $50,000 in revenue I'll never recover. This is extraordinarily common among business owners. We remember the marketing campaign that didn't work and become gun-shy about marketing. We remember the hire that didn't work out and become reluctant to hire. We remember the client who left after a price increase and become afraid to raise prices again. But these memories are misleading us. A good decision that produces a bad outcome is still a good decision. A bad decision that produces a good outcome is still a bad decision. The outcome tells you about what happened. The process tells you about what you should do next time. Professional poker players internalize this deeply. They make a positive expected value play, lose the hand, and shrug. They don't question the play. They don't become scared to make the same play next time. They understand that correct decisions produce good results over time, not every time. Results lie. Process tells the truth. Let me explain how information changes everything. This is where most people get stuck indefinitely. In poker, you never have complete information. You can see your own cards. You can see the community cards. You can observe your opponent's behavior. But you can't see their cards. You're always making decisions under uncertainty. This is exactly like business. You can see your own capabilities. You can see market conditions. You can observe competitor behavior. But you can't see the future. You can't know for certain how customers will respond, how markets will shift, or how your initiatives will perform. You're always making decisions under uncertainty. The question isn't whether to act with incomplete information. The question is how to act with incomplete information in a way that maximizes your expected value. Here's what I learned. First, the absence of certainty doesn't mean the absence of information. You may not know exactly what your opponent holds, but you can narrow the range of possibilities based on their actions. You may not know exactly what the market will do, but you can estimate probabilities based on trends, data, and patterns. Most people see uncertainty and stop thinking. Professionals see uncertainty and start estimating. That's the difference. Second, waiting for more information has a cost. In poker, waiting costs you blinds. In business, waiting costs you opportunity. Every day you delay is a day your competitors might act. Every month you postpone is a month your runway shortens. There's a point where the cost of acquiring more information exceeds the value of having it. Knowing when you've reached that point is a crucial skill. I used to postpone decisions until I felt certain, but certainty never came. And while I was waiting for it, my business continued to struggle. The paralysis wasn't caution. It was avoidance dressed as analysis. Third, the best response to uncertainty isn't to avoid risk. It's to size your bets appropriately. In poker, you don't bet your entire stack on uncertain situations. You size your bets based on the quality of your information and the magnitude of the opportunity. This is how I restructured my approach to business decisions. Instead of avoiding uncertain bets entirely, I started making smaller bets on uncertain opportunities. I tested a marketing channel with $200 before committing $2,000. I trialed a new service offering with 3 existing clients before building it out fully. I hired a contractor for 10 hours before committing to 40. Each small bet gave me information. Each piece of information reduced uncertainty. And over time, these small bets compounded into the clarity I needed to make bigger moves with confidence. Uncertainty isn't a wall. It's a variable. Now I want to address something that holds most people back. This is the invisible force that makes smart people make stupid decisions. In poker, there's a psychological trap called loss aversion. Research shows that humans feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Losing $100 hurts more than winning $100 feels good. This asymmetry distorts decision-making in predictable ways. It makes us overprotect what we have. It makes us undervalue what we could gain. It makes us choose smaller certain outcomes over larger uncertain ones, even when the math clearly favors the uncertain option. Loss aversion is the engine behind playing not to lose. It's the psychological force that makes caution feel wise even when it's destructive. When I was struggling with my business, loss aversion was running the show. Every client felt irreplaceable. Every dollar in my account felt precious. Every risk, no matter how calculated, felt like an unacceptable threat to what little I had left. But here's what I eventually understood. Loss aversion doesn't just affect big decisions. It affects small ones too. And that's where the real damage happens. I can trace specific moments. There was an email I drafted to the marketing director at a company I admired. I spent 45 minutes writing it. Then I deleted it because I was afraid of being ignored. That company hired a competitor 3 months later for a project I could have done better. There was a conversation I avoided with a client who was taking advantage of my pricing. I let it continue for 8 months because I was afraid of conflict. I lost roughly $12,000 in undercharging. There was a conference I didn't attend because the ticket was expensive and I wasn't sure I'd get anything from it. A colleague went, made a connection that led to a 6-figure contract, and I spent the next year wondering what if. These small avoidances seemed harmless in isolation, but they compounded. They created a pattern of retreat that slowly shrank my world while I thought I was protecting it. The things you avoid don't just cost you once. They cost you every day you don't do them. Overcoming loss aversion doesn't mean ignoring risk. It means calibrating your emotional response to match mathematical reality. It means asking yourself, if I were advising someone else in this situation, what would I tell them to do? That last question became a powerful tool for me. When I was paralyzed by a decision, I would imagine a friend facing the same situation. What would I tell them? Almost always, the advice I'd give someone else was more courageous than the decision I was making for myself. We're better at seeing clearly for others than for ourselves. We can use that asymmetry as a corrective lens. Let me share something that changed my perspective permanently. This applies whether you're running a business, building a career, or making any high-stakes decision. In poker tournaments, there's a phase called the bubble. It's the point where one more elimination means everyone remaining gets paid. Miss the bubble, and you leave with nothing. Survive it, and you cash. The bubble creates intense psychological pressure. Most players tighten up dramatically. They avoid confrontations. They fold hands they'd normally play. They optimize for survival rather than winning. This is exactly the wrong response. When everyone else is playing scared, opportunity explodes. The players who recognize this can accumulate chips rapidly. They can build the stack they need to compete for first place. They can use everyone else's fear as a weapon. But most players can't see this. They're too focused on not busting. They're too afraid of being the one who misses the money, so they play small, survive the bubble, and then wonder why they never seem to win tournaments. They survive into irrelevance, and they call it success because they didn't fail visibly. This dynamic applies directly to business. When markets get uncertain, most businesses play scared. They cut budgets, they freeze hiring, they stop marketing, they hunker down and wait for conditions to improve. And for those who can see clearly, this creates extraordinary opportunity. The clients your competitors are neglecting become available. The advertising space your competitors abandoned becomes cheaper. The talent your competitors laid off becomes accessible. The market share your competitors surrendered becomes claimable. The moment when everyone else is playing not to lose is precisely the moment when playing to win becomes most valuable. This doesn't mean being reckless. It doesn't mean ignoring genuine risk. It means recognizing that risk and opportunity are two sides of the same coin. When everyone sees only risk, opportunity is hiding in plain sight. After I understood this, I started looking at market uncertainty differently. Instead of asking, how can I survive this? I started asking, what opportunities is this creating that I couldn't access before? The answer changed everything. The answer is where I found my biggest client. The answer is where I found the margins that finally made my business sustainable. Fear creates opportunity, but only for those who aren't afraid of it. I want to talk about bankroll management. This might be the most important concept in this entire video, and it's the one most people ignore. In poker, your bankroll is the money you have available to play with. Bankroll management is the discipline of only risking a small percentage of your bankroll on any single game or tournament. This ensures that variance can't wipe you out. It ensures that you can survive the inevitable downswings long enough to reach the upswings. Professional poker players are religious about bankroll management. They know that being properly bankrolled isn't just financial prudence. It's the prerequisite for optimal decision-making. Here's why. When you're playing with money you can't afford to lose, your decisions become distorted by fear. You can't make the aggressive plays that positive expected value demands because the emotional weight of losing is too heavy. You're technically playing poker, but you're not playing your best poker. You're playing scared poker, and scared poker loses. The same principle applies to business. When you're operating without financial reserves, every decision carries existential weight. You can't take the calculated risks that growth requires because any loss might end the game. You're technically running a business, but you're not running it optimally. This is why I eventually realized that building reserves was more important than almost anything else. Not because reserves themselves generate return, but because they create the psychological conditions for optimal decision-making. When you know you can survive a setback, you stop fearing setbacks. When you stop fearing setbacks, you can evaluate opportunities clearly. When you can evaluate opportunities clearly, you make better decisions. And better decisions compound into better outcomes. This insight also changed how I thought about the costs of playing scared. Every month I spent in survival mode wasn't just a month of stagnation. It was a month of depleting the reserves that would have enabled me to play fearlessly. The safe decisions were making me less safe, not more. The irony is devastating when you see it clearly. Playing safe makes you less safe over time. If you're operating from a position of financial pressure, I'm not suggesting you take reckless risks. I'm suggesting you recognize that building a cushion should be a top priority, not because cash in the bank is the goal, but because it's the foundation that makes all other goals achievable. Let me synthesize what we've covered into a framework you can use starting today. First, identify which game you're playing. Be brutally honest with yourself. Are your decisions oriented toward building, or are they oriented toward protecting? Are you thinking about what you might gain, or are you thinking about what you might lose? The answer reveals whether you're playing to win or playing not to lose. Second, evaluate decisions by expected value, not emotional value. For any significant decision, estimate the probabilities and outcomes. What happens if it works? What happens if it doesn't? What's the likely return over multiple iterations? This discipline pulls you out of emotional reactivity and into strategic thinking. Third, accept that uncertainty is permanent, not temporary. You're never going to have complete information. The question is whether you can act intelligently with incomplete information. Waiting for certainty is just sophisticated avoidance. Fourth, size your bets appropriately. You don't have to go all in on uncertain opportunities. You can make small bets that give you information. You can test before you commit. You can scale up as uncertainty decreases. But you do have to bet something. Folding every hand is not a winning strategy. Fifth, judge your process, not your results. Good decisions sometimes produce bad outcomes. That doesn't mean you should change your process. If your reasoning was sound, keep making the same kinds of decisions. Variance will even out. Results-oriented thinking leads to inconsistency and fear. Sixth, use the asymmetry of advice. When you're stuck, ask yourself what you would tell a friend in your situation. Your advice to others is usually better than your instincts for yourself. Use that gap as a source of clarity. If you want to go deeper with this framework, I've built a complete system around it. The ebook is called Full Ebook, Mind of a Grinder System. It's $10. It covers everything from pre-decision frameworks to long-term mental architecture. It's for people who are serious about transformation rather than entertainment. The link is in the pinned comment alongside the free PDF. No pressure, just an option. I want to tell you how the story ended, or rather, how it didn't end. After I shifted my approach, things didn't magically transform overnight. That's not how it works. But they did start to shift. I raised my prices, sent the email announcing the increase to 14 existing clients. 3 left. 11 stayed. My revenue increased by 40% even though my client count decreased by 20%. I had more time to deliver better work, which made my remaining clients more loyal. I started reaching out to bigger opportunities. Sent 17 cold emails to companies I'd previously thought were out of my league. 14 didn't respond. 2 responded with polite rejections. 1 turned into a $12,000 contract that led to a referral worth another $28,000. It came from the 15th email. The one I almost didn't send because I was afraid of being ignored. I invested $800 in the marketing test I'd been postponing. The first campaign lost $312. 0 clients. I analyzed what went wrong, adjusted, and ran a second test. That one brought in 2 clients worth $6,000 combined. I learned more from the failure than the success. None of this was guaranteed. All of it involved uncertainty. But by shifting from playing not to lose to playing to win, I gave myself a chance at outcomes I never would have accessed through caution alone. The business survived, more than survived. Within 18 months, it grew into something I couldn't have imagined during those dark days in the parking lot, staring at my phone and wondering if everything I'd built was about to disappear. And the lesson became part of how I see the world. Not just business, everything. I want to leave you with something uncomfortable. Right now, in your work or your life, where are you playing not to lose? I don't mean theoretically, I mean specifically. What's the email you haven't sent? The conversation you've been avoiding? The price you're afraid to charge? The opportunity you've convinced yourself isn't right for you? What's the bet you're refusing to make? Not because the expected value is negative, but because losing would hurt more than winning would feel good? Here's the harder question. How much is that avoidance costing you? Not in some vague future sense. Right now. This month. This year. What opportunities are closing while you wait for the certainty that never comes? These are uncomfortable questions. They're supposed to be. Clarity often hurts before it helps. But if you can answer them honestly, you'll know exactly where to start. The shift from playing not to lose to playing to win isn't a one-time decision. It's a practice. It's catching yourself in survival mode and choosing differently. It's evaluating opportunities by their math instead of their fear. It's making moves when your instincts tell you to wait. It gets easier. The framework becomes intuitive. The fear becomes manageable. And the results compound in ways that make the initial discomfort feel small by comparison. What I've shared with you today isn't just poker strategy applied to business. It's a way of seeing that changes everything once you internalize it. It's the recognition that most of what holds us back isn't circumstance or capability. It's our own relationship with uncertainty. It's our own confusion between safety and wisdom. Once you see that confusion clearly, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you become a different person. Someone who makes different choices. Someone who builds instead of protects. Someone who plays to win. If this changed how you see your decisions, Tell me. Leave a comment. What's the decision you've been avoiding? What's the bet you're finally ready to make? And if you want more content like this, subscribe to Mind of a Grinder. We don't do motivation, we do clarity. And clarity is worth more than enthusiasm could ever be. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.